There had been massive wars in the past. The Napoleonic Wars had humongous battles. The Battle of Nations was one of the largest assembled battles in the history of history. Which, by the way, this is history with Mr. E. Um, but war had begun, and it was raging. There was a 600 ish mile front that ran from the English Channel all the way down to Switzerland. And in this front was basically a no man's land with on either side allies and Central Powers, dug into trenches and firing chunks of metal at each other for years on end. The war was terrible. We watched those videos in World History class last year about it, so if you want to watch them again, I suggest you go on to Amazon and look up a documentary on World War One. I can't remember what it was called that we watched. I'll try to set a link for it, but it's a good hour and some odd minute overview of how the war went. But the thing is, the war was bloody, awful, and lots of people died all the time. America was not part of this war. Woodrow Wilson declared neutrality. He did not want to be part of the war. America did support the Allies, not the Central Powers, and we began to up our trade with the Allies significantly. Trade quadrupled between 1914 and 1916. America also had problems with German saboteurs in the United States, pushing for labor strikes, especially in our arms factories because we were supplying Europe with a lot of their weapons, pushing for labor strikes, setting off bombs, setting fires, and sabotaging machinery and things like that. But that's war, sabotage, espionage, and can almost be expected. The U.S. was neutral. And we maintained the right to trade with both sides, but we really didn't. We just traded with the Allies. Great Britain proclaimed that the North Sea, and if you look on a map, you'll find the North Sea right around Great Britain, between there and Germany, proclaimed that the North Sea was a military zone, and because of the might of their navy, they searched and stopped all ships going into Germany and seized contraband of war, which basically was any cargo they felt like seizing. And they even seized cargoes of neutral countries. If you had a ship full of bananas and you thought that those bananas were going to be used to make guns or support the war effort, then they were seized. If you had a ship full of guns, then they were seized. If you had a ship full of supplies, first aid, anything they wanted to, they would seize. Germany hated this. Their navy wasn't as strong, but they had a secret weapon, and that was the U-boat, the undersea boat, which we call the submarine in America. And they declared the seas around the British Isles, the North Sea, and anything around the British Isles a war zone. Could you see a submarine underwater? No. Could you hear it? Could you see it approaching? They were wildly effective stealth weapons, especially in the First World War. They were diesel subs through World War I and World War II. They're all nuclear now. So they had to surface for fuel and air and things, but the nuclear subs now can run for 6 months or even longer without having to come up above water. The only reason they would have to is because they're out of food or such. Okay, so these U-boats would um would ram or torpedo enemy merchant ships, enemy military ships without warning. Neutral ships were told to enter at your own risk. One of those neutral ships that was even warned by the Germans, you might not want to get on this boat because we know that it's carrying contraband and we're going to sink it, was a British luxury liner named the Lusitania. Remember that name? It had 100 or so Americans on board, and it was sunk and 1,000 people died. The Germans said that it was carrying munitions and it was an act of war, and they had been warned to stay off the boat. Americans got really, really angry at this time and began to scream for war. Wilson responded by sending 3 strongly worded letters that we must be warned before sinking our ships, or any ship with Americans on it, blah, blah, blah. The Germans made the Sussex Pledge in March of 1916, when, after the French steamer, the Sussex, was torpedoed without warning. Germany pledged not to attack without warning and without saving human lives. But the U.S., they stated, must make Great Britain abide by the rules of international law in conducting their blockade of German ports. The U.S. told them to buzz off, and shortly thereafter, Wilson was reelected under the slogan, "He kept us out of war." And then right after that, we started to ramp up for war. In June 1916, the U.S. began a military buildup, a massive military buildup. Wilson begged Europe to have peace in Europe without victory. He said that peace would be forced on the loser and lead to another conflict if they fought this war out. And guess what? He was right, because once Germany ended up losing this war, guess what they did? Yes, they formed the National Socialist Party. They allowed Hitler to become the man, and it led to a war twice as bad as this war. More than twice as bad when it comes to loss of life. He said the war must end with peace among equals, but Europe was not interested. And then, of course, on the 1st of February in 1917, Germany reopened unrestricted submarine warfare in order to cut off all British supplies and to defeat the Allies, especially Great Britain and France, before the inevitable happened and U.S. entered the war. And U.S. still didn't enter the war. That was the main reason that they did eventually, but until a couple more things happened. So we have the sinking of the Lusitania, the German unrestricted submarine warfare, and then the Zimmermann Note happened, where Germany sends a letter to a diplomat in Mexico telling Mexico that if they allied with Germany, then they get back their territory that they lost in New Mexico, Texas, and Arizona during the Mexican Cession after the Mexican-American War. This was intercepted and printed in all American newspapers, and now Americans were mad. They were mad about the Lusitania. They're mad about unrestricted submarine warfare. But now they're really ticked that Germany's being kind of, behind their backs with this whole thing and writing letters about parceling out America. And then by mid-March of 1917, Germany had sunk 4 unarmed U.S. merchant vessels at a cost of 36 U.S. American lives, and America was done. So those 4 things: sinking of unarmed merchant ships, the Zimmermann Note, unrestricted submarine warfare, and the sinking of the Lusitania, basically just led Congress to declare war on Germany on April 6th, 1917. Now, the war only lasted 14 to 18, but we were about to go all in. in America.